Welcome to a Powerless Mage presence, where we take deep dives into concepts that hold the keys to changing your everyday reality.
And if you're here listening, it's probably because you're looking for a real solution, a way to turn that feeling of dissatisfaction or being overwhelmed into action.
Exactly. You are in the right place. Today we're talking about one of those foundational ideas that if you can just flip it on its head, it can unlock so much personal freedom, so much power.
That's exactly right. Today, we are focusing on one of the heaviest concepts we carry. I mean, it dictates our stress levels, it limits our potential.
It just sacks our fulfillment.
Yeah. We're talking about responsibility. For so many of us, it just feels like this insurmountable burden, something pushed on us by work or family or just the world.
And that feeling, that constant weight, is precisely what we are here to dismantle. Our mission in this deep dive is, it's simple, but I think the outcome is truly revolutionary.
It really is.
We want to help you transform responsibility from what feels like a heavy, painful stone strapped to your back into a powerful, shining shield that you choose to wield.
We want you to feel that authority, that control, the self-mastery that comes with true ownership.
And we've drawn from a fantastic reflection text that really challenges our ingrained and, let's be honest, usually negative ideas about this.
It really does. It offers a clear, very practical path to, greater maturity, genuine freedom, and maybe most importantly, real authority in your own life.
We're going to look at how to accept responsibility with integrity, but also, and this is key, how to strategically reject it to actually gain control over your life.
Okay, so before we jump in, we should probably set the tone here because this can feel a little challenging.
Right. This whole discussion is a reflection. It's based on observing how successful people and institutions think about duty versus how people who feel trapped do.
So if at any point something feels a bit uncomfortable or maybe even accusatory about where you are right now, just remember the intention. It's about providing a mirror.
We are here to help you change your relationship with this core concept. It's not about blame. It's not about humiliation. It's just about providing the tools for some profound self-improvement.
So to start this transformation from, burden to shield, we have to understand why. Why does responsibility feel like such a suffocating weight?
And the source material starts with this incredibly powerful, almost visceral image. It's a historical character from Mexico's independence movement. His name was Juan José de los Reyes Martínez Amaro.
But everyone knew him as El Pipola.
El Pipola, right. And he wasn't a general or some big political figure. He was a miner.
But his one act of courage was absolutely vital. And the image, the enduring image of what he did, that's what speaks directly to our modern negative idea of responsibility.
So picture the scene. It's immortalized in statues all over Mexico. There's this massive stone grain warehouse, the Alhóndiga de Granaditas, and the royalist forces are holed up inside.
And El Pipola's mission is just incredibly dangerous. He has to set fire to these giant wooden doors so the independence fighters can get in.
But to do that, he has to cross this wide open space, completely exposed to rifle fire from above.
So what does he do? I mean, this is the part that's so striking. He ties enormous, heavy stone slabs to his back.
And these aren't like lightweight pieces of armor. They are cripplingly heavy. They literally force him to crawl, agonizingly, toward the door with a torch in one hand.
That weight was the price of success. It was his protection. The stones let him absorb the shots long enough to reach the doors and set them on fire.
A huge sacrifice. It took immense physical effort.
And this is where the source begins its analysis.
Yeah.
It points out that, beyond the heroism of it all, which is undeniable, it's that raw, burdened posture that's so striking.
It's a perfect mirror for how we see responsibility today, isn't it?
The perfect mirror.
Yeah.
We carry these responsibilities, work deadlines, bills, family expectations, and they feel exactly like those enormous and heavy stones.
They weigh us down. They stop us from moving freely, from standing tall. We end up on our knees, crawling through life just to survive the rifle fire of daily problems and criticism.
Yeah. And we might get the job done. We might burn the door down. But it costs us our freedom, our speed, our joy. We become defined by the weight, not the purpose.
The stone is for protection, but it dictates this slow, painful way of living.
That crawling posture, it just screams exhaustion. You're not steering your life. You're just surviving.
And this feeling is so common, so pervasive in our culture that it actually changes how we behave.
Oh, it absolutely does. The source describes our current environment as a perpetual game of dodgeball.
I love that analogy. Think about it in an office or even a family. Someone asks, who's responsible for this mistake?
And what's the immediate gut reaction from everyone in the room?
You tense up, you get ready to dodge.
Because in our cultural programming, if that dodgeball of responsibility touches you, it means something bad has happened. You're guilty, you're about to be penalized.
We see it as blame, 100%. Not as an opportunity, not as authority. It's just a penalty for being involved.
Yeah. And because we all have that shared aversion, we spend so much energy trying to delegate or deflect or just plain ignore our obligations instead of actually solving the problem.
The energy we spend dodging is massive.
We're so busy dodging the stones being thrown at us that we completely miss the point that those very stones, if we chose them and strapped them on correctly, could be the armor that lets us move forward.
They could be our strength, not the cause of our collapse.
And that's the core challenge we're presenting to you right now. It's a huge shift in perspective, to move from being the perpetual victim of your obligations to becoming the proactive master of your choices.
We need to stop seeing the stone and start seeing the shield.
But that shift, it does require acknowledging the weight, feeling what you're already carrying.
Reflective question, #1. How often do you feel like you are crawling through life under the weight of your perceived responsibilities? Consider the things you carry every day. Are they truly helping you achieve a defined goal, or are they simply forcing you to move slowly and painfully, sapping your energy for unnecessary reasons?
Okay, so now we get to the absolute heart of the argument, the key insight that starts that transformation from crawling to standing tall.
And it's all about why we play that game of dodgeball in the first place.
Exactly. The primary reason we try to evade responsibility is because of one concept we incorrectly and automatically associate with it. And that concept is guilt.
We just fuse them together, don't we? It's automatic. A problem happens, a project fails, there's a fight in a relationship, and our brain immediately jumps to, I'm responsible, therefore I'm guilty.
And I deserve to feel bad or be punished. We just assume that owning a situation automatically means we deserve moral condemnation if something goes wrong.
And that mistaken connection is the root of so much paralysis.
It is. So here's the essential difference, and this becomes our shining shield. Being responsible for something does not mean being exempt from failure or bad outcomes.
Right. Things break. People make mistakes. The world is messy. It's not about guaranteeing success.
So what is it about then? The true meaning is entirely proactive. It's pragmatic. Being responsible means you must actively seek solutions. You must care for and protect that which is in your charge.
So if your team's project fails, you're not necessarily guilty of the failure. There could have been a dozen external factors.
Correct. But you are absolutely responsible for finding out why it failed, for cleaning up the mess, and for putting systems in place so it doesn't happen again. Guilt is completely unnecessary for that process. In fact, it's a distraction.
And this is where the source makes a really fascinating, almost provocative point. It argues that guilt, as we think of it, isn't even a real constructive thing.
It's just something we use. Society uses it to justify feelings of discomfort, of indignation. It's an easy emotional shortcut.
Think about what guilt actually does. It makes us feel terrible, which tricks us into thinking we're paying the price or doing some kind of necessary emotional work.
But what does feeling guilty actually do to fix the broken sink or the failed project?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Guilt is retrospective. It's all about the past. It's a way to self-flagellate without taking a single forward step.
That's a huge insight. Guilt is an emotional indulgence. We use it to get sympathy or to distract ourselves from the much harder, practical work of fixing things. It's easier to say, oh, I feel so guilty, than it is to say, okay, here are the 3 steps I'm taking to solve this.
Let's use the source's example of a store robbery. It's so clear. So a store is robbed. The emotional reaction is what?
Rage, indignation. You want to point fingers.
Right, and pointing at the criminal as guilty or even blaming the owner for not having enough security, it feels emotionally satisfying. It justifies the awful feeling of violation.
But feeling indignant doesn't unrob the store. It doesn't fix anything.
The responsible action is different. It's identifying the assailant as responsible for the crime. That's a practical legal definition. Holding him accountable, having him serve a sentence. Those are concrete actions. They're solutions.
And the owner is responsible for rebuilding, for reviewing security, for supporting their employees. The focus shifts entirely from this useless circular feeling of blame
to the pragmatic work of managing consequences and ensuring safety. That's responsibility. Nobody in that chain needs to feel paralyzed by guilt to do what needs to be done.
And when you finally grasp that distinction, that guilt and responsibility are separate things, the entire concept transforms.
It stops being that heavy stone of shame.
And it becomes what we've been talking about, a shining shield, a symbol of maturity, control, and real freedom.
You stop being a passive victim of your circumstances. You gain immediate, powerful control over your actions. The source compares it to gym weights.
They're heavy at first, they're uncomfortable, your first instinct is to just drop them.
But the more you choose to lift that burden, the more familiar you become with it, the lighter it feels relative to your own strength. And in that process, you get stronger.
You aren't just carrying the weight anymore. You're internalizing the strength required to carry it.
And that's the heroic mindset the text describes. Accepting responsibility turns you from someone just reacting to life into an authentic hero steering their own course. And people naturally respect that.
You see it with El Pipola. His act was incredibly painful, but his contribution, the thing he was responsible for, has been remembered for centuries. That respect comes from taking on a high-stakes responsibility, not from avoiding it.
And we see the contrast everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Especially in leadership. Compare the supervisor who just delegates everything and refuses to take the blame when things go wrong. The dodgeball player.
But that person creates mistrust, chaos.
Now compare that to a professional like a firefighter. Their core responsibility is preserving life. It literally compels them to run into danger.
The respect we have for that person is immediate. It's immense. Why? Because the magnitude of the consequences they are willing to own is so high.
And the source challenges us with the reverse of that. Compare a truly responsible supervisor, one who helps their team solve problems, to a firefighter who avoids the fire and leaves people trapped.
The sense of moral failure for the firefighter is just. It's infinitely greater.
And that's the key takeaway. Responsibility is judged not by how uncomfortable it makes us, but by the size of the consequences when we ignore it. Guilt. Guilt is just the emotional camouflage we use to justify reality when we fail.
Let's just hit that one more time. Guilt is an excuse. It's a distraction from the forward-looking process of solving problems.
Reflective question, #2. If you view responsibility purely as a shield of control and authority, instead of a stone of inevitable guilt, what area of your life would you take control of right now? What project, relationship, or personal goal have you been treating like a heavy, guilt-inducing burden that could immediately become a source of authority?
So we've laid out the philosophy. Responsibility is about action and authority, not guilt and blame. But okay, let's get practical. How do we actually do this in our daily lives?
Right. How do we stop dodging and start actually wielding the shield?
Right.
Well, if we accept that responsibility is about solutions, then the first step is always clear. You have to start by defining a clear goal or objective.
If you don't know where you're going, you can't be responsible for the journey.
Exactly. And as soon as you define that goal, that automatically triggers what the source calls implicit responsibilities. These are the duties that just naturally come with the objective, even if they aren't written down anywhere.
Like what?
Well, the simplest one. The fact that you're alive. Your inherent responsibility is to take care of your life, your health, your finances, your mental well-being. These are implied duties. You can't really delegate the maintenance of your own life.
Or in a work context, if you accept a job, you're implicitly accepting the responsibility to help the company meet its goals.
And to fulfill your tasks. But it's even smaller than that. It's being on time, maintaining quality, treating people with respect. These are the small bricks that build the foundation of the larger responsibility.
If you skip those small things, the whole thing eventually crumbles.
And what's crucial here is to recognize that there are different ways to be responsible. Outsiders might criticize your methods, but you have to keep your eyes on the ultimate goal.
The example of a parent who needs to go out is perfect for this.
Right. If the main responsibility is taking care of my children, and you have to be away for a while, calling a responsible, trusted babysitter is a responsible act. The goal is care, and the method is delegation to someone competent.
Even if some outsider judges you and says, a good parent should never leave their kids.
Exactly. That judgment is based on an emotional ideal, not the practical goal. The parent's responsibility is the children's well-being, and responsible delegation is a valid way to achieve that.
Okay, but this focus on the goal helps us avoid one of the biggest dangers to our success.
Self-sabotage. This is a huge warning sign.
This happens when we make decisions that look responsible on the surface, but we know deep down that they actually undermine the goal.
Yes. We do it because the appearance of responsibility often satisfies the social requirement, even if we're failing the core duty.
Let's use that parent example again. Leaving your kids with an irresponsible friend who you know will just ignore them. On the surface, you delegated. It looks responsible.
But internally, you failed your duty because you knew the outcome was compromised before you even left. That's self-sabotage.
We see it at work all the time. Someone says yes to leading a huge project they know they don't have time for just because they want the promotion.
The appearance of leadership is there, but the core responsibility, the project's success, is already in jeopardy because of their own lack of integrity. True responsibility requires honesty.
Okay, so let's talk about when things go wrong. Because they will. Failure is inevitable.
And when things break, the role of the responsible party is to resolve them, or, if they can't, to accept the consequences. This is where the shield of control really comes into play, because you're being proactive.
The source uses a really simple example for this.
Yeah.
Your house sink fails. You, the owner, are responsible. You have a few responsible options.
Option 1, direct action. If you know how, you repair the sink yourself. You exert control through competence.
Option 2, you delegate. You don't have the skills, so you use your resources, your money, to call a plumber. Control through strategic delegation.
And then there's option 3. And this is the one that takes the most integrity.
What's that?
If you don't have the knowledge to fix it or the money to call a plumber right now, the responsible thing to do is to close the stopcock and go without a sink until you can get the knowledge or the resources.
Wow. Okay.
This is maybe the most powerful display of responsibility. It's a conscious choice to limit the damage. You accept the immediate discomfort of not having a sink to prevent the catastrophe of a burst pipe in a flooded house.
So as long as you understand and accept the consequences of your actions, you're being responsible.
Exactly. The only truly irresponsible choice is to ignore the problem and let it get worse.
Yeah.
That's surrendering all control.
And yet, a lot of people would criticize option 3, wouldn't they? They'd say you should be able to afford a plumber.
They would. And that external criticism is exactly what leads us into the victim narrative.
Instead of owning our responsible decision, I chose to turn off the water to prevent a disaster. We fall into complaining.
That's the self-sabotage that happens after the decision. We change the story from, I had to close the water intake, to the passive voice. The water intake had to be closed.
As if some outside force did it to us. We remove our own agency from the story.
And by complaining, you immediately reduce the value of the responsible choice you just made. You put yourself back in a position of guilt, of victimization. You drop the shield and go back to crawling.
Now, we need to be careful here because the source says venting can be useful.
It can be, but only when it's done strategically, at the right time, in the right place, with the right person, and with the goal of actually solving something.
Healthy venting is about processing stress so you can move forward.
The danger of unhealthy complaining is that you just relive the failure over and over. You get stuck in a loop of victimhood, reinforcing the idea that you have no control. That's why it's so draining.
Reflective question #3. In a recent challenging situation, a conflict, a financial squeeze, or a mistake, did you focus on solving the problem and taking control, or did you fall into complaining, thus reducing the value and ownership of the responsible decision you already made?
So we've covered the philosophy, we've covered the mechanics of acceptance. Now we get to the final and maybe the most mature and liberating part of this whole deep dive.
Which is?
Understanding that sometimes the most responsible thing you can possibly do is not accept a responsibility.
That flies in the face of what we're taught, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That being an adult means saying yes to every duty that comes your way.
It does. But the source argues that responsible rejection is absolutely crucial for integrity, for maintaining your own capacity, and for preventing future failure.
So how do you know when to say no?
You have to enter what the source calls an inventory phase. Before you commit to any new chosen responsibility, you have to do a sober, honest evaluation.
So it's like a checklist you run through in your head.
Exactly. First, you assess your existing capabilities.
Yeah.
Do you have the skills, the energy, the emotional bandwidth right now? Second, you weigh what the new obligation truly implies, the hidden costs, the time, the worst-case scenario.
Okay.
Third, you consider the consequences of taking it on, the good and the bad. And fourth, and this is the one we often miss, you weigh the consequences of not taking it on. Will you lose an opportunity? Will you face some social judgment?
And only after that honest assessment can you make the mature decision to reject it.
And this phase is so important because most people just bypass it entirely. They say yes because of false ideas or social pressure.
The simple analogy of a kid wanting a pet really illustrates this.
Well, perfectly. A child wants a pet because their friends have one. They're only focused on the fleeting happiness of fitting in.
They completely ignore the implication. The daily feeding, the cleaning, the vet bills, the lifetime commitment.
And when reality hits, that happiness is gone, and what's left is an unwanted, often neglected obligation. That child made an irresponsible decision because they didn't do the inventory.
And we see that same pattern in adult life all the time, just with much, much bigger stakes.
For sure. And we see it on a grand scale with huge life decisions like marriage and having children.
The source is very clear about this.
Mm.
These decisions are heavily influenced by society. There's intense pressure to follow a traditional path.
So much so that people who choose to stay single or couples who choose not to have children are often judged. They're called selfish or irresponsible.
But the reality is that marriage and parenthood require an enormous amount of dedication. They are maybe the most all-consuming responsibilities a person can take on.
You're responsible for another human being's future, their well-being.
And the consequences of accepting that responsibility, only halfway of saying yes on the outside when you're a no on the inside, can be terrible.
You see it in the outcomes. Absent parents, distant parents, even violent ones. That's the result of a half-taken responsibility where someone felt they had to accept the role because of social pressure.
So, under this lens of real integrity, the conclusion is pretty stark.
It's that it is infinitely better, more mature, and more responsible to be fully aware of what's required and reject the responsibility up front. It's better to know you aren't willing to do the work than to accept the role, do it poorly, and cause lasting harm.
And just to be crystal clear, this is not an anti-family message. Not at all. There are countless amazing people who accept and fulfill these responsibilities beautifully, even through adversity.
Exactly. They are the ones wielding the shield with honor. The source frames this simply as an invitation to do a deep, individual reflection before you make a major life commitment.
Whether it's having a family, taking a new job, starting a business, it has to be based on an honest assessment of your willingness, not on what you think you should do.
You have to be honest with yourself about whether you are truly willing to strap on that shield and own all the outcomes, good and bad.
Reflective question, #4. What responsibility in your life did you take on primarily due to external pressure or a false idea of what you should be doing? And knowing what you know now about integrity and full ownership, would you have responsibly rejected it?
Wow. We have walked through a really transformative journey today. We started with the image of El Pipola's heavy stones, that posture of just struggling survival.
And we moved all the way to seeing responsibility as a shiny shield of personal control, of maturity, and real freedom.
We learned how to separate it from that distracting, unreal emotion of guilt.
And we saw that guilt is often just an excuse for inaction. We established the actual mechanics of being responsible, defining the goal, avoiding self-sabotage, and managing failure with the courage of a conscious choice.
And crucially, we realized that the mature decision to strategically say no is often the most honest and responsible choice you can make. It protects your integrity and the well-being of everyone around you.
That whole transition from feeling like a victim of your obligations to becoming the master of your actions, that is where your real, undeniable power is. So when you approach any big decision this week, maybe don't just ask yourself, can I do this? That only measures competence.
Instead, take a pause and ask yourself this deeper question. Am I willing to accept and own all the potential consequences, both good and bad, of this decision without falling into the trap of guilt or perpetually complaining?
Don't simply take our word. Put everything you heard here to the test. Make this knowledge truly yours.
We invite you to share your ideas, your thoughts, and your experiences in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this deep dive or found it useful, please like the podcast and subscribe to learn more about similar topics.
Remember, the power is yours.